I remember the exact moment it started. The way she looked at me, not with annoyance, not even curiosity, but like she was holding a question she didn't dare voice. I was leaning over the counter at the bookstore, my fingers tracing the edge of a stack of dog-eared novels, trying not to notice her. But her eyes, God, her eyes. They were sharp, but not in a challenging way. Sharp in a way that caught everything I didn't say. She came in just as the rain started tapping against the window pane, the kind of drizzle that makes the air smell like wet asphalt and old paper. Her coat was long, dark, perfectly draped, and her hair, streaked with hints of gray, caught the faint light, glinting like strands of silver thread. Mid-40s, I guessed. Older than anyone I'd ever thought I could notice like this. And yet there she was, moving with a quiet certainty, scanning the shelves with a faint furrow in her brow, as if the books themselves might betray some secret she wanted to read. I didn't mean to stare. I told myself that 100 times. But then she paused near the section I was shelving, brushing her fingers against the spines like she was unsure of what she was looking for. And that's when it happened. She looked up. Our eyes met, and for a moment the whole store shrank to that narrow space between us. "Can you help me find something?" Her voice was soft, but there was an edge, a tremor I couldn't place. Yeah, of course." I swallowed and tried to push my hands into my pockets, like that would make me appear taller, calmer, less like a kid standing in front of someone who probably had everything figured out. She watched me, tilting her head just slightly. Something not too predictable. I felt my chest tighten. Not predictable. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but I didn't. Instead, I led her to a shelf in the corner. Obscure novels, quiet, unassuming, books that felt like they'd been waiting for someone to care enough to notice. She lingered behind me, her presence warm against my shoulder. Then, without warning, she laughed softly at some title I'd pulled off the shelf. Not a big laugh, just a breathy chuckle that made the air feel heavier, charged in a way I didn't understand. I turned toward her, and for the first time, I noticed the small details, the slight crease near her temple, the way her hands flexed nervously around the spine of the book, the tiny scar on her wrist that peeked out from under her sleeve. "I always forget how comforting books can be," she said, almost to herself, and then glanced at me. And that glance, I swear, was like a key turning somewhere deep inside my chest. We didn't speak for a moment. I stacked a few books quietly, trying not to breathe too loudly, trying not to let her see that I was counting her blinks, memorizing the tilt of her lips when she smiled half-heartedly at the rain outside. Then, she did something that I can't get out of my head. She stepped closer, just enough so that I could feel her presence brush against mine. Her hand hovered over mine for a fraction of a second, as if testing the air between us. I wanted to reach out, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, she whispered, so softly I almost didn't catch it. "Tell me you feel something too." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. And just like that, she stepped back, picked up a book, and walked toward the register, leaving me staring at her retreating figure, my fingers still tingling where her hand had hovered. I haven't stopped thinking about it since. That whisper, that look, the impossible suggestion of something I'm not supposed to understand yet. And the rain keeps tapping against the window, as if reminding me I can't undo the moment, even if I wanted to. The following week, I found myself back at the bookstore, though I didn't really need a reason. She was there again, crouched behind a stack of books in the philosophy section, her coat slung over the chair of a small reading table. I swear I could tell she hadn't slept well. The faint shadows beneath her eyes, the way she rubbed the bridge of her nose every so often. I cleared my throat, trying not to make it obvious that I was watching her. "Need a hand?" I asked, though the words felt inadequate. She looked up, startled, like she wasn't used to anyone noticing the small, almost invisible things about her. She hesitated, then forced a small smile. "I might." Her voice had that fragile edge, careful, like she was guarding something. We worked in silence, stacking a jumble of returned books, organizing the shelves. I kept noticing little things. The way her fingers grazed the spines of the novels as if she were afraid of leaving a mark. The soft exhale that escaped her every time she leaned too far. Every movement felt intentional and yet hesitant, as if she was holding herself back from something she wanted. Long day, I asked eventually, my voice low enough to not disturb the quiet hum of the store. She paused, glancing at me out of the corner of her eye. You could say that. The words were clipped, but her shoulders sagged just slightly, betraying the weariness she tried to hide. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, revealing a line of silver that caught the light. I wanted to reach out, to touch it, but I didn't. I knew better than to let myself. There was a small moment, a pause so brief I almost missed it, when she laughed quietly at a pun in one of the books. It was soft, almost apologetic, as if she weren't used to letting herself enjoy something without restraint. I watched her, memorizing it, the curve of her lips, the brief flicker of relief in her eyes. Do you ever get tired of pretending? I asked, almost without thinking. She blinked, startled, then looked away, pressing her hands to the top of the shelf as if to steady herself. Pretending, she echoed. Her voice was softer now, unsure. Yeah, I said, shrugging, trying to sound casual, though my stomach tightened. That everything's fine, that you have it all together. Her hand lingered on the edge of a book, trembling slightly, and she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. There was something fragile there, something I wasn't supposed to see. For a moment, we just stood like that, near enough to feel each other's presence, but not close enough to cross the line. The hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed to shrink around us. Then, she turned toward me, eyes locking with mine, and for the briefest instant, the guarded armor slipped. Her gaze softened, almost pleading, and she let her hand brush mine. Not fully, just a whisper of contact, as if testing the water without diving in. And that was it. A small, fleeting moment, but it burned in me. A quiet charge between us, delicate and impossible, and I couldn't stop thinking about the tremor in her hands, the faint curve of her smile, the vulnerability she had tried to hide. Even as she pulled back, her eyes held mine a second too long, leaving me suspended in that tension, waiting for something neither of us dared say. The rain had returned that evening, heavier this time, drumming against the windows of the small hotel cafe where we'd been assigned to reorganize a shipment of promotional books. The place smelled faintly of wet leather and coffee grounds, the kind of smell that lingers in the back of your throat when you've been bending over boxes for hours. She was crouched beside a stack of boxes, her hair damp from the drizzle outside, strands sticking to her forehead. I kept my distance, though every instinct screamed to close it. Something about the way she leaned over, pulling a book from the pile, made my stomach tighten. You know, she said, voice low, almost a whisper. It's hard to believe people really read these things. She smirked, but the corners of her mouth betrayed a faint exhaustion. I read, I said, and stopped. My voice sounded clumsy, too loud, and I cursed myself inside. She looked at me then, for longer than usual, tilting her head, as if waiting for a confession I didn't have the courage to give. A sudden buzz interrupted the moment, her phone vibrating against the table. She glanced at it quickly, then silenced it. A text from someone I didn't know. Are you coming tonight? She didn't say anything aloud, but I noticed her fingers hesitate over the screen, trembling just slightly. I wanted to ask, to say something, anything, but I didn't. I forced my hands to my sides, pretending to inspect a box. We worked in silence for a while, and the storm outside made the room feel smaller, the air thicker. I noticed the way her shoulders slumped after she shifted a heavy box, the faint curve of her lips when she tried to hide a yawn, the almost imperceptible way she sniffed, trying not to show fatigue. At one point, we had to crouch down on the floor to reach a lower shelf at the same time. Our knees brushed, lightly, almost nothing, but the spark it ignited in me was undeniable. I froze, pretending to adjust the stack of books, aware of the heat of proximity that shouldn't exist. She didn't pull away, not immediately. She let her hand linger near mine, fingers brushing against the corner of a box, and then she exhaled softly, almost as if testing the boundary. For a moment, I thought she might say something. Anything. Her eyes searched mine, unguarded, and I felt the pull in my chest. The temptation to close the space, to finally reach out, was almost unbearable. And then, a knock at the door. A coworker stepping in, asking if we needed more boxes. The spell broke. She straightened instantly, her shoulders stiffening, her gaze shifting away as if the near moment had never existed. I stayed crouched a second longer, watching her, memorizing the subtle tremor in her hands, the way her eyes flicked toward the door and then back at me for a fraction of a second before she turned fully. Nothing happened. Nothing could happen. And yet, the silence that followed was louder than anything she'd whispered. I couldn't stop thinking about that tiny space between us, the brush of our knees, and the unspoken possibility that lingered like the storm outside. We ended up on the hotel balcony that night, the storm having moved on, leaving a damp, empty cityscape beneath us. The air smelled of wet stone and distant exhaust, cold enough to make her shiver slightly as she hugged her coat around her. I stayed close enough to notice, but not close enough to touch. We didn't speak at first. The hum of the city, the occasional drip of water from the roof above, filled the space between us. And in that silence, I realized how unnatural it felt to be near her, how everything inside me was taut with unspoken words. She began, then paused, letting her gaze drift to the horizon. Her hands twisted in the folds of her coat. I don't know what this is between us. I swallowed, my throat dry. Neither do I admitted, quieter than I expected. Her eyes flicked to me then, searching, hesitant. We keep circling around it. Everything we do feels normal, but it isn't. It can't be. The words trembled on her lips, and I noticed the tiny quiver of her jaw, the way her shoulders hunched like she was carrying something too heavy to put down. I wanted to say something, to reach for her, but all I could do was watch her. Her vulnerability was rare, sudden, and somehow terrifying. She wasn't the confident, controlled woman I'd first noticed, not tonight. Tonight, she was fragile, honest, human in a way that made my chest ache. I don't know if I should even be here, she whispered, voice breaking, almost lost to the wind. I keep thinking, if I just ignore it, maybe it'll go away. But it doesn't. It never does. I wanted to tell her that I felt the same pull, that the tension, the longing, the chaos inside me mirrored hers. But I didn't. Words felt too loud, too clumsy, and somehow, saying nothing seemed more truthful. She took a step back, her gaze dropping to the wet pavement below. "And what about you?" she asked finally. Her voice was small, but I felt the weight of it in my chest. I wanted to answer, wanted to say I couldn't stop thinking about her, that my mind kept returning to the brush of her hand, the tremor in her laugh, the way she made the world feel sharper and quieter at the same time. But the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, and the nod felt like the closest thing to honesty I could manage. We stayed there for what felt like hours, side by side, saying nothing. Every glance, every exhale, carried the weight of all the things we couldn't say. And then she spoke again, softer this time, almost a whisper. Maybe we're just too late for ourselves." I watched her shoulders shake slightly as she turned away, the faintest glimmer of tears catching the light of the street lamps. And in that moment, I knew that whatever this was, whatever it had become, it wasn't going to be simple. It wasn't just longing anymore. It was a quiet devastation I couldn't name. This part ends on raw vulnerability, deepening the existential tension without moving into romance yet. It was quiet in the bookstore that afternoon, the soft hum of the heater and the occasional squeak of a cart breaking the silence. She had invited me to help sort through some old boxes of return donations. Nothing extraordinary, just a mundane task. Yet, even in the mundane, the tension between us hummed. As we opened a box labeled miscellaneous, a small photograph slipped out, curling slightly at the edges. She froze, her fingers hovering over it like it might bite. "It's old," she said finally, her voice low, almost afraid of the sound. She held the photo toward me, but I didn't lean in immediately. I waited. It was a picture of her younger self, mid-20s, smiling beside a man whose face was familiar in a vague way I couldn't place at first. There was something in her eyes that tightened as she looked at it, a mixture of longing and loss. "I lost him," she admitted, almost whispering. not long after this was taken, and I've carried it with me. Always. She didn't look at me, only traced the edge of the photo with her finger. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the distance her confession had created. But the words felt too loud, too clumsy. Instead, I reached over, gently touching the corner of the photo, letting my fingers hover against hers for the briefest moment. I remember him, I said softly, even though I barely knew him. I remembered her stories, fragments she had shared in passing, the way she'd always smiled a little sadly when she mentioned him. Or, I remember what you said about him. Her shoulders twitched, almost like she wanted to laugh, almost like she wanted to cry. It's silly. I haven't thought about it in years, and now it's all I can see. She let out a shaky breath, closing her eyes for a moment. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't thinking about the past, not about him, only about the way her lips quivered as she spoke, the way her hands shook slightly even when she tried to steady them. But I stayed silent. I didn't need to say it. She already knew, in some unspoken way. She looked at me then, her gaze finally meeting mine. You make things feel different, she said, almost reluctantly. Her voice was careful, yet there was an undeniable tremor, like she'd crossed a line she hadn't intended. For a second, the world outside the bookstore seemed to pause. The smell of old paper, dust, and faint rain filled the air between us. I wanted to lean in, to say something, to make it right, but all I could do was keep my eyes on hers. And then she smiled, a small, fragile thing, barely there, but seismic in the way it shook the ground beneath my chest. That was harder than I expected, she whispered, placing the photo back into the box, as if putting the memory down might make it lighter. I nodded, though inside, my mind was spinning. The quiet revelation had shifted everything between us, though nothing had changed outwardly. She straightened, turning to move toward the shelves, leaving me standing there, stunned, with the ghost of her smile and the tremor of her words etched into my memory. This part introduces a quiet but seismic emotional shift, deepening vulnerability and connection without crossing into romance yet. The cafe was nearly empty, the late afternoon sunlight slanting through the tall windows, turning dust motes into tiny, suspended stars. She sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a warm mug, her coat draped over the back of the chair. The room was quiet, but it felt like the air between us was stretched thin, waiting to see if it would snap or hold. I keep thinking about everything, she said softly, not looking at me. Her fingers traced the rim of the mug, leaving faint wet marks. About us. About how we've been circling each other for weeks. I didn't say anything right away. I just watched her, noticing the faint tremor in her hands, the tired set of her jaw, the way her hair caught the sunlight in strands of silver. She was beautiful in a way that wasn't about youth or perfection. It was weighty, layered, lived in. I don't know if this is wrong, she continued. Her voice wavered slightly, betraying the calm she tried to hold. But I can't pretend it isn't something. I took a breath, steadying myself. I don't think it's wrong, I said finally, careful, almost measured. I just don't know what it should be. Her eyes met mine then, soft and uncertain, and for a moment, everything else fell away. I could see the way she was holding herself back, the careful restraint that had defined every interaction between us. And in that quiet, I realized I was doing the same. We sat like that for a long while, sipping coffee, letting the silence stretch and settle. No words could improve it, and none were needed. Every glance, every slight shift of posture, spoke more than language could. At one point, her hand brushed mine, accidental or not, and we both froze. Neither of us moved away. I let my fingers rest lightly against hers, a tentative acknowledgement of something we both knew but hadn't named. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't urgent, it was exactly what it needed to be, fragile, real, earned. She let out a soft breath, leaning back slightly, and I could see the tension leaving her shoulders in a slow, almost imperceptible wave. I mirrored her motion, not closing the gap, but not distancing myself either. I guess, she said, voice low, hesitant, we just exist here. Together. And that might be enough for now. I nodded, letting a small smile tug at my lips. Yeah, I think that's enough. The light shifted across the room, warm and golden, falling over her face, and I caught the faintest smile, almost shy, almost apologetic, but full of something I couldn't name. We sat there in silence after that, hand lightly touching, mugs cooling, hearts racing in ways that words could never capture. The world outside continued in its noisy chaos, but in that tiny cafe, nothing existed except this shared space, this quiet understanding. And in that quiet finality, I felt something settle inside me. Not a declaration, not fireworks, not even a certainty. Just the undeniable, gentle truth that whatever this was, it had arrived fully, softly, and it was ours. This concludes the emotional climax and realistic, earned resolution, emphasizing connection without overt romance declarations. It's been months since that quiet afternoon in the cafe, and sometimes I still catch myself thinking about her the way I did when we first met. Intensely, impossibly, but now with a softness that wasn't there before. Not longing, not obsession, just awareness. Life has a way of moving forward, yet leaving traces of certain people that time can't fully erase. I notice the small things, the way I hesitate when someone leans too close, the way I unconsciously look for the faint tremor in someone's laugh, or the quiet depth behind their eyes. Because she taught me that love, at its most fragile, isn't about grand declarations or perfect timing. It's about noticing, paying attention, holding space without needing to control it. She's changed too. I can feel it even from the fragments I hear or see. The guarded edges have softened. She smiles more openly, laughs more freely, and sometimes, just sometimes, she pauses in a moment as if she's expecting someone. And I know it's me, somewhere in the back of her mind. We don't define what happened in tidy terms. There was no sudden leap, no dramatic confession that changed everything. But what we have, the quiet understanding, the gentle touch of fingers that linger just a second too long, it's enough. It's everything. We both know it, and it's not fleeting. I've learned, maybe painfully, that connection isn't always about possession. It isn't about immediacy. Sometimes, it's about the slow burn, the small acknowledgments, the silences filled with trust, the moments when your hands brush and neither of you pulls away. That's love in its most honest form. And sitting here, reflecting, I realize that the story of us isn't dramatic. It isn't perfect, but it's ours, lived in layers of hesitation, curiosity, and quiet courage. We learn to be present with each other, to notice the tremor of a hand, the pause in a laugh, the weight behind a whispered word. That, more than any declaration, has taught me what love can be. Sometimes, late at night, I'll picture her walking past a bookstore or turning a page in a novel, and my chest tightens just a little, a soft echo of all the moments that led here. And I smile, because I know that despite the hesitation, the fear, the unspoken questions, we found something worth keeping. So here we are, not at the end of something, but at the beginning of a quiet, lasting understanding. A recognition that the most human, flawed, and patient form of love can leave a mark more permanent than any grand gesture. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?